Today we're going to be discussing the differences between DMT and 5-MeO-DMT, because whether you're wanting to traverse hyperspace or visit the bosom of God for a little bit, the differences between these two related but otherwise very different in subjective and spiritual effects, these two substances couldn't be greater from one another, right? And at this point in our evolution as human beings, the stakes cannot be higher for people in the general public to understand the distinction between these two molecules. Now, I am psychedelic attorney and court certified psychedelic health and safety and chemistry expert Greg Lake. Welcome to the Entheo SK channel. Again, the impetus for this video, I'm not just going to beat up on Joe Rogan's video here. I'm not just going to beat up on it because there's a lot of videos where people really just conflate these two things. And as you'll learn towards the end of this video, when we get into the subjective spiritual effects and experiences of these two substances, you will really come to understand why it is critical that we move forward making this distinction, okay? And again, I'm not here to promote any substances or use of substances, just generally providing education to the public, okay? But let's go ahead and dive in. First, we're going to talk about the chemistry and molecular structure of these two molecules, okay? So DMT. The DMT molecule is really nature's master tryptamine key. So please look at that structure and absorb it for a second, because when we talk about psilocybin, psilocin, bufotenine, 5-MeO-DMT, all have the common DMT core, right? So the DMT is the core tryptamine in Mother Nature, okay? Now, when we look at 5-MeO-DMT, you see the DMT core, and now we have this 5-methoxylated tail. And, you might be saying to yourself, well, great, they look so similar. How could they be so different? We'll get into that because we're also going to be talking about the neuropharmacology and the effects on the brain between these two substances. And as you'll see, this 5-methoxylated tail acts on a different serotonin receptor site, or has a greater affinity for a certain receptor site in the brain than your other, your core DMT molecule like psilocybin, psilocin, DMT, okay? But we'll get there, right? So now let's turn to the history and the various routes of administration of these substances. So many people here, I'm sure, are familiar with DMT, right? It's found abound in the natural world, in plant, in other organisms. The history of use primarily related to ancient shamanistic use in South America in the jungle, okay? Many people here are familiar with ayahuasca, right? DMT in itself and 5-MeO-DMT are not orally available, meaning that the monoamine acids in your stomach eat up these substances before they can reach concentration enough for you to feel them. Hence, why the ancients use ayahuasca, right? It contains the MAOI, the ayahuasca vine, which prevents it from breaking down, meaning that they can feel it and experience it. Now, with 5-MeO-DMT, also ancient use in South America, but in a little bit different way. There is a tree seed, I'm not going to go into it today, but there's a tree seed in South America that contains both 5-MeO-DMT and DMT, and when properly crushed, dried, and prepared, can be used as a snuff, okay? The beauty way, as we call it, it's a whole ordeal, okay? It's not easy, but it can be ingested that way and can be psychoactive that way, okay? So these are the most ancient uses of which we are aware of these two substances. Again, mostly originating out of South America, okay? Now, when we go to routes of administration, obviously I just told you about the ancient routes, the beauty way, right? But these days we've kind of switched it up a little bit, And so with DMT, primarily what you're going to find in this day and age are people who extract it from plant material and make it into a crystalline clear to yellow powder and smoke it. Some people do inject. That's not as common. Now, there are some people, particularly religious practitioners these days and researchers, who actually do IV administration of DMT, right? They are surfing hyperspace, right? These spiritual realms. And many are trying to map it these days. So we'll just leave that where it's at for a later video, okay? Now, 5-MeO-DMT. Again, it is found in these tree seeds in South America. Here in North America, probably the primary vehicle people, or at least the primary form in which people consume it is really twofold. One, there's always synthesized 5-MeO-DMT being made in a lab, but as many are aware, many particularly spiritual practitioners harvest the venom from the Bufo aloe vera Aquarius toad, okay, which venom contains both 5-MeO-DMT and bufotenine, which is also a tryptamine with the DMT core. And they dry it and then they smoke it to ingest it, and it's a very powerful experience. Now, there are other practitioners out here who have found that subcutaneous or intramuscular injections of 5-MeO-DMT are a little bit more desirable because the effects aren't quite as, the onset's not as quick, and so the effects are not quite as on the front end intense, and we'll learn why that matters later on in this video. But anyways, I just wanted to bring that up because some are using it in that regard. I have not heard of any researcher or practitioner using an IV drip of 5-MeO-DMT, but hey, I'm never surprised anymore, okay? So let's move on now to the neuropharmacological effects, okay? And this is really where we're going to be getting into the differences between these two molecules, besides the slight difference in their chemical structure, their molecular structure, and the history, routes of administration. So the neuropharmacological effects. Now, DMT, like psilocybin, psilocin, they act primarily on the HT2A serotonin receptor site in your brain. Okay, now this receptor site seems to really elicit these really vivid, what would we say, images or fractals, loss of sense of space and time. Your classical psychedelic effects, okay? Again, with an emphasis on the visual part of it, okay? Now, one thing I do want to note is another part of the brain called the default mode network, which is essentially your ego, okay? The DMT and these other A2 affinity binding molecules don't have as much of an effect on shutting down the ego, although they do cause some ego dissolution, absolutely. Definitely damper it down, okay? Now, let's move on over to 5-MeO-DMT, and here's a key difference, y'all. Listen to this, okay? 5-MeO-DMT acts primarily on, has an affinity for the 5H21A receptor site, okay? Now, this receptor site does not cause much of any visual experience, right? And 5-MeO-DMT acts very heavily on the default mode network, basically shutting down your ego. So with 5-MeO-DMT at a sufficient dose, again, not promoting or encouraging this or anything, but is almost surefire to pretty much cause complete ego dissolution, okay? But again, let's go back. There's not these intense visual experience. It's going to be a white light experience, and we're going to get that in just a second, right, when we get to the subjective and spiritual effects of these substances. But I just wanted to show you that a slight adjustment in these affinity sites mean big differences in the way that these substances are felt and experienced, okay? So let's move on. Let's talk about the subjective effects, and I've touched on it a little bit already, but, DMT, when it's done at a sufficient dose, wow, a really incredible experience, right? People report basically traversing hyperspace, going through these fractal columns, loud sound of like cellophane wrapping, kind of like the universe is collapsing in on itself and traveling. But again, this whole time, they still have some sense of themselves, not complete ego dissolution. They have some sense of orientation in the universe, even though it might not be a lot, they still got a little bit, right? And people report entity encounters. And I know many of y'all have probably heard that, right? So one of the most consistent reports of DMT is encountering entities of various sorts, but primarily the machine elves, the magical machine elves, right? And we'll talk about some interpretation of that here in just a minute when I talk about the spiritual kind of meaning behind these experiences that people have discussed. But generally, that's going to be your DMT experience. But again, the main difference for what we're about to talk about 5-MeO-DMT, not total loss of ego. You retain some sense of self, some sense of orientation, and it's very visual, and you have encounters with other beings, okay? Now, 5-MeO-DMT, like I said, pretty much complete, at sufficient dose, complete ego loss, okay? Complete ego loss. Not a lot of visuals. What do you get? White light. You get white light. You get white light. Now, and we'll talk a bit more about this in the next section, but, people's egos sometimes fight this, okay? Sometimes people's egos fight. So this, 5-MeO-DMT can be a jarring experience, and I'll talk about that warning in a bit in just a second too. So, but just realize that it's not some colorful fractal deal. It's basically white light, Okay, white light. So now that's a good way. Let's segue now into the spiritual effects or experience that people report. And just for full disclosure, particularly on the 5-MeO-DMT part of this, here in just a second, I'll interject a little bit of my experience and my thoughts spiritually, religiously with it, because look, just to be honest with you, in order to fully comprehend and understand this, I think if you don't like factor in the spiritual religious quality that science has confirmed about these experiences, you don't have all the data. Just saying. But anyways, DMT, as far as spiritual interpretation and experience, right? It's called the spirit molecule. Okay, well, why is that? Well, I covered it just a little bit just a second ago, right? You traverse the spiritual realm, what many people also refer to as the astral realm, to get to this place where you are communing with what seem to be disincarnate spirits, i.e. machine elves. It could be other things, but primarily it's machine elves with glowing, bedazzling balls. I always like to refer to Terence McKenna's interpretation. He was of the belief that these machine elves were actually unincarnated souls in some kind of waiting room, waiting to be incarnated. And the reason why he said that is because many times they're very playful. They want to play with you like they're kids. They got these miracle balls that they show you and all this, right? So I don't know. That just resonated with me. Terence McKenna's, not saying it has to you, because of my personal experience with DMT as well. But again, spirit molecule. Now let's switch on over to 5-MeO-DMT, the God molecule, okay? And I think this will make sense to you, right? Because like I said, there is no traversing hyperspace. There is no meeting spirits or other disincarnate entities. Once you get past the ego dissolution, you are, the only way I can describe it, ladies and gentlemen, like I said earlier in this video, in the bosom of God. Now, when I had my 5-MeO-DMT experience, okay, my mother had passed away suddenly many years before, and so for me, it really felt a lot like being back in my mother's womb. But in any sense, the main reports, jiving with my experience, are that you're basically, in God's presence. You feel infinite, unconditional love, infinite intelligence. You are no longer in the picture, right? You are no longer in the picture. You are merely a single thread in a whole tapestry of creation, okay? And you're good with it. It feels so good. It actually feels good to release the self and go back into the total fabric of creation, right? And so coming out of those, and really both of the experience, but particularly the 5-MeO-DMT experience, I mean, it just can inform your ontology, your theology, your cosmology in a very real way. And DMT can too, don't get me wrong. They are very good at that, okay? So that's kind of the spiritual interpretation there. Now, let me pull back a bit before we get towards the end and give you a little bit a word of caution, right? Particularly with 5-MeO-DMT. Okay, again, I'm not advocating anyone use this. I'm not promoting that use or anything, but I just want to give a word of caution here because the ego loss, okay, can be very tough for people. It really can. If you have a lot of attachment to this physical world, it can be very tough to let go. It really can. And that's not saying anything's wrong with you. We live in this third dimensional realm, right? When you're blasted into God's realm, just my perception, it can be a little jarring for people. So, I was very fortunate. As a matter of fact, at the end of this, I'm going to put a link to my video describing the psilocybin experiences that I had leading me to write my first book, which that first book then connected me with the community where I had my first experience, right? But I say that to say this is that I had been doing mental, physical, health preparation, spiritual preparation for this experience. And so my experience was pretty gentle in the sense that I didn't have a lot of resistance to that barrier, although there's always a little. And it was just incredible, right? But I just can't emphasize that enough that, as much as we might want to go get the healing and divinity that's in that experience, we see other people doing it, please realize that this is not something you should just ever jump into, okay? And again, not even advocating that you do it, right? But I just want to make people fully aware of that, okay? God bless each and every one of you. Now, if you made it this far in the video, now you're about to really get a treat. Can I get a like, comment, subscribe, please? We're going to talk about the newest iteration of 5-MeO-DMT, and that is 4-hydroxylated 5-MeO-DMT. Now, let's back up for just one second. Psilocybin in magic mushrooms is a 4-hydroxylated version of DMT. Well, what's the 4-hydroxylation do? There you go. It allows the DMT molecule to survive digestion and get into the bloodstream and give you effects. Now, it's not as intense as smoking DMT straight to the brain and here we go. But basically, when you are consuming psilocybin, the 4-hydroxylated version of DMT, you are consuming DMT that can survive digestion. There is now also a version of 5-MeO-DMT that is 4-hydroxylated called solmethoxin, which also survives digestion. And again, nowhere near as intense as smoking 5-MeO-DMT, right? Which is preferable for some people, not advocating you use any of these things, right? But I just wanted to make y'all aware that it's out there. Some commentators are saying that it's the greatest psychedelic discovery of our century. So I didn't think that this video would be complete without presenting this to you at the end. And look, if y'all made it this far, God bless each and every one of you. Thank you for tuning in today. I hope y'all are enjoying the videos. I got tons more content coming. I do live and breathe this every day. This is my joy. This is my life. I'm very honored and grateful to share it with you. So again, thank y'all very much for tuning in, and I will see y'all next time. Much love.